Now she was doing it again. This can't be a coincidence, Sandra thought, while looking at the woman walking into the plane. There was something about her, something that gave her a bad feeling, a really bad feeling. At first, she hadn't really noticed her. She was busy doing her duties as a flight attendant. She had a lot of things to do on her checklist once the passengers boarded the plane, so her mind was occupied with that. But it didn't take long before her mind was occupied with something entirely different. From the minute the woman stepped onto the plane, Sandra had an odd feeling about her. She couldn't quite figure out what it was, but something about her told her to pay close attention. "What is it? What are you trying to tell me?" Sandra thought, pensive. She bit her lip and squinted her eyes to take a better look at her. As the woman made her way down the aisle, Sandra's intuition prompted her to take in every aspect of her appearance and behavior. The woman, who appeared to be in her late 20s, radiated a kind of nervous energy that seemed to charge the atmosphere around her. Her hands were restless, constantly adjusting her purse or smoothing back a strand of hair, revealing her anxiety. Sandra wondered, what's on her mind? Observing the woman's quick, blue-eyed glances around the plane, she saw a natural beauty shadowed by her unease, as if her worries were dimming her brightness. Sandra couldn't ignore the alarm bells ringing in her head. Why does she seem so out of place? She wondered, her gaze following her as she finally chose a seat next to a man. Was that someone she knew? Was that the reason she was acting so nervous? She was so caught up in her own thoughts that she hadn't even noticed her colleague, Harper, sneaking up on her. "What's up?" Harper said cheerfully. Sandra gasped. "Oh, you startled me," she said, putting on a fake smile. "I was just daydreaming for a bit," she explained, keeping the mood light. She didn't want to tell her what was on her mind. What if she was wrong? Harper took her in for a moment and then asked, "Ready to start serving drinks?" Sandra nodded, and they both headed towards the galley. Sandra desperately hoped she could serve in aisle 2. She had a specific reason for wanting to work in aisle 2, was where the woman, who had caught her attention earlier, was sitting. She hoped to get closer to maybe understand a little more about her. "Can we take aisle 2? She asked Harper, hoping it might help her figure out that odd feeling she had earlier. But it seemed luck wasn't on her side. "Looks like Charlotte and Steve already started there," Harper replied with a frown. "Why aisle 2? She wondered curiously. "Did you spot a cute guy sitting there?" With a mischievous grin, she glanced quickly at Sandra and then turned her attention to aisle 2, trying to spot the guy she guessed Sandra had noticed. "Oh no, that's not it at all," Sandra quickly interjected, trying to downplay her interest. "It's really nothing." Yet Harper wasn't convinced and continued to give Sandra that all-too-knowing look, her smile suggesting she saw right through the facade. Feeling the pressure to deflect further inquiry, Sandra adopted her most convincing tone and said, "It's actually because of my lucky number, you know. Number 2. That's the whole reason." Harper paused, her response drawn out and playful. Well, it seems Sandra has a crush she doesn't want me to know about. All right, if that's how you want to play it, fine." She continued with a hint of jest. "There's no harm in looking, you know. I spot handsome men all the time, and I would definitely share that eye candy with my colleague. But whatever," she sighed, pretending to give up on the matter, yet her tone suggested a blend of amusement and mock resignation. Sandra decided to ignore her and closely observe the interactions between the woman and the man seated next to her. As the man ordered a beer for himself and a water for the woman, it became apparent to Sandra that they were traveling together. However, the woman's demeanor, her scared and uncertain expression, did not escape Sandra's keen observation. Sandra's gaze drifted to the man beside the woman, observing the authoritative way he managed their surroundings. He was noticeably older, likely in his late 40s or 50s, exuding an air of seasoned confidence. He had a dignified look and a posture that showed he was used to being in control. His clothes were classic and neat, chosen to show a sense of order and tradition. His interactions with the woman were marked by a subtle but unmistakable dominance. He chose their seats, adjusted the overhead bin without seeking her input, and even spoke for her when a flight attendant asked if they needed anything. His voice carried a firmness that bordered on insistence, suggesting a dynamic that made Sandra uneasy. Who was he to her? Even though everything looked okay on the outside, Sandra felt in her gut that something was off. She really wanted to help the woman, who seemed very uncomfortable but wasn't sure how. What exactly is wrong, she wondered, feeling a bit uncertain. Since the flight was going to be 13 hours long, Sandra knew she had time to figure things out. She decided she needed to watch carefully and figure out the best way to help, making sure to do it gently and without drawing too much attention. The more she watched, the more convinced she became that these gestures were a silent plea. Sandra leaned on her intuition, decoding the woman's movements with growing urgency. Then, suddenly, it clicked. "What's going on, Sandra?" a colleague asked, startling her from her thoughts. "You seem off today," Sandra hesitated, then confided everything: her observations, the woman's fearful behavior, and even her own experience from childhood. When she finished, Charlotte listened carefully. "Why not just ask the woman directly?" she suggested. Sandra paused, realizing she hadn't even considered that. Her mind had gone straight to detective mode, shaped by her past. "But the man will deny everything," she said quietly. Charlotte nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Let's just watch them for a while. We need to be sure before taking action." "Okay," she said reluctantly, "but something's off here." The calm of the cabin shattered as the woman suddenly screamed. The sound pierced the soft hum of the plane, catching everyone's attention. Sandra met Charlotte's gazebo more doubt in her eyes. That scream was the confirmation they didn't want but needed. "See?" Sandra whispered urgently. "I told you." "I get it now. Let's go," Charlotte replied. There was no hesitation. The two rushed toward the woman, whose panic was now impossible to ignore. She was trying to move away from the man beside her. "Leave her alone!" Sandra's voice cut through the commotion. The man turned, startled, his expression flashing confusion and denial. "She's just scared of turbulence," he said, his voice defensive. But Sandra didn't believe him. Something about his words didn't feel right, and this time she wouldn't back down. Without hesitation, she turned around, her steps quick and silent as she made her way back to the galley. There, with a steady hand, she dialed the airport's emergency number, her mind racing as she reported their imminent arrival and the uneasy situation unfolding on board. Sandra spoke with urgency into the phone. "You need to be at the gate, ready to board as soon as we land. I can't let that woman leave the plane with that man." Her voice carried a resolve born of deep concern. Hanging up, she turned to Charlotte, sharing a look that said it all. "We're doing the right thing," Charlotte reassured her. As the plane descended, Sandra's mind was a mix of anxiety and resolve. The intercom crackled as the pilot instructed everyone to prepare for landing. Sandra exchanged a determined look with Charlotte. They were committed to seeing this through. When the aircraft door opened, 3 police officers entered, changing the atmosphere instantly. Their presence alone signaled that something serious was unfolding. They stopped in front of the man and the woman. The man, clearly surprised, shifted in his seat as the lead officer spoke firmly, asking to speak with both him and the woman. Just moments earlier, he had seemed relaxed, but now his posture stiffened, his hands trembling slightly as confusion overtook his calm. He asked if something was wrong, but the officer only stated they needed to continue the conversation off the aircraft. Meanwhile, the woman remained silent, her eyes scanning the scene. A female officer gently signaled her to stand, and after a moment's hesitation, she nodded, subtle but clear acceptance of the help being offered. The man handed over his identification calmly, offering to explain everything. His tone was even, though urgency lingered beneath. The officer reviewed the documents carefully, his expression shifting as a key detail stood out. "You're her dad?" he asked. The man nodded. "Yes," he confirmed, explaining that the woman had autism and that her partner couldn't make the trip, so he had come instead. The gestures, he said, were part of a communication method they developed to help her cope with stress. Sandra's heart sank slightly as the explanation unfolded. The pieces no longer pointed to danger, but to a misunderstanding. She had acted on instinct, an instinct rooted in her past hand. Though her intentions were good, she now saw the complexity behind what she had witnessed. With each detail shared by the father, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. This wasn't a case of danger, but of a woman navigating emotional challenges. The officers, listening closely, noticed the woman now calmer, speaking softly and confirming her father's explanation. Relief spread through the cabin, replacing earlier tension with empathy. The officers' expressions softened. Their suspicion faded as understanding took root. Despite the calming atmosphere, Sandra felt the weight of her mistake. In the quiet of the empty plane, Sandra made a promise to herself to trust her instincts but with compassion. She had acted with concern, but she had also misjudged a situation. Mistakes would happen, she knew, but how she responded to them would define her growth. As she stepped off the plane, a new sense of resolve guided her. The incident, though difficult, had given her perspective. Her role was more than service. It required empathy, discretion, and humility. And from now on, she'd carry all of that with her. Thinking ahead to future flights, Sandra felt more grounded. Every passenger had a story. Every gesture could hold meaning, and she would remain alert, but with heart and understanding leading the way.